Welcome to the E-commerce Profits Podcast, where we feature top founders and experts in the e-commerce industry and take an in-depth look at the struggles and successes in growing e-commerce brands profitably.
What's good, folks? Here we have with us William Harris, CEO of Elumynt, spelled Elumynt. Interesting. And an advertising agency for e-commerce. You've done some incredible stuff in the space, working on some incredible projects that are currently still behind the scenes. We talked a little bit about it before we hit record, and I'm super excited for you, William. But thank you for coming on the show and sharing with us your insights and your experiences around growing businesses, not just for growth's sake, but profitably, which is super interesting. It seems pretty straightforward and pretty common sense, but I suppose it's not as common as we think. Let's start there. You have a really different approach to optimizing for profitability as an advertising agency. And that's often difficult. Just for some context. We run an advertising agency as well, primarily focused on email and SMS. But when you're a specialist, great at what you do in specific channels, it's really difficult for you to have a relationship with clients in a way where it allows you to optimize for profitability and understand what your clients are going through behind the scenes. And you have a different approach to that, I understand. Tell us more about what that looks like and how do you exactly optimize ads around profits for clients?
Yeah, I love that you called it common sense because you would think that it would be. But I always appreciated the idea that it's like if something was common, the very nature of what makes it common is why it's not good to a point, right? Like if you think about the bell curve, it's like that just means average, and it's not going to be exceptional. And so while it would seem like it makes sense, it's not something that most people are doing. And I think that there's a couple of reasons why. One of the biggest reasons why I don't think a lot of advertising agencies have begun optimizing around profit, for the most part, is because they're not exposed to it. They don't have any access to those numbers. And for one reason, I think that's because it requires trust. You have to trust that you're sharing some pretty, let's say deeper personal metrics with your agency. There's got to be a level of trust there. And so we're, for a lot of our customers, we're getting into their actual P&L or at least some type of analog of what that P&L looks like. And then the other part of that is I think that it's not even so much that it's from the agency perspective. A lot of customers, we're working with their marketing team and the marketing team has no clue what the P&L is. And that's pretty common if you get into a lot of bigger businesses. It's not like the typical marketing director or e-commerce director has access to the full P&L. And so they don't even know what that is to share with us. And so I think that a big part has just been that lack of access to data and the lack of maybe trust to go that deep. But once we establish that rapport with people, we can show how that makes a big difference. It makes it a lot more effective at hitting a target. And so let's just imagine that you were let's just say that we were learning how to play basketball for the first time. And you told me, you were like, so your goal is you have to get the basketball from this side of the court over to this side of the court. And then you have to, and then you can make points when you get it down on this side of the court. And I keep doing this repeatedly. I keep getting it to my side of the court. I'm pretty excited and I'm happy about it. Or let's say soccer, like I don't know soccer terminology. Yeah. I didn't play that. So maybe the field or the pitch or whatever it's called in soccer. But you get there, you just keep doing it. You're just like, boy, we're crushing it. Like I keep getting it to our side. We're doing really well. And you're like, okay, but my actual target is not just to get it to the side, but you actually have to get it in this hoop or in this net or whatever that might be. And I go, well, I didn't know that. I didn't know that there was this other target that was hidden that I was unaware of that I had to hit. And so I think that's what makes it difficult sometimes is that sometimes agencies will pat themselves on the back and say, we did a really great job. We kept getting it over to the side of the court. And the business is saying, the finance team at least is saying, yeah, but we didn't actually hit the real goal that we really had that we didn't tell you about and gave you no metrics or numbers or whatsoever to hit. And so I think that's one of the first pieces there is like, we need to be on the same page with what the real goal is.
I presume that like just top of mind, this may not work for every single client that you work with. Not just on a trust level, but just from a from just a feasibility level, it may be
Right.
difficult to understand the P&L of a private but really, really large company when there are multiple business units involved and cross-pollination of finances, and most importantly, it may not be in either the purview or the interest of your stakeholders, your key stakeholders within marketing, because they might be looking at a different set of metrics. In those instances, hold on. First, let's take a step back.
Sure.
First question: what type of businesses would this apply to? And do you have, like, in the back of your mind, do you go like, all right, above a certain level of sophistication or revenue level, you go, all right, I got to take a completely different approach. And in the mid-market, this is what I would do. Small, this is what I would do.
Yeah. So, mid-market is where we consider ourselves to be, really prime in the way that we at least define it, at least in generalities, is going to be about 10 million to 100 million. That's like our sweet spot of who we service. When we get into companies above that, there's not that many. The largest company that we helped get acquired sold for 800 million, just to put that in perspective, right? So not quite unicorn stage. So once you get above that, but within like that segment of customers, the $10 million customers are probably much more likely we're working with the founder still in some ways, and we have access to them and able to get those kinds of numbers. And then maybe you start getting to like the, 50 million to 100 million, and that starts to kind of change a little bit. And so I'd say that you're right about being able to get access to that data and whether or not that's even capable from their data capabilities to be able to put something like that together to send to us. In those situations, what we try to do then is some type of an analog to whatever that P&L is. And like the most basic way that I would like frame this is, can we have a rough idea of what your cost of goods sold are as a percentage of your sales? So if I know that you sell $2 million worth of stuff today, where the cost of goods sold 40%, 20%, 90%, like that makes a big difference for us, right? Like, can we at least get there? And then, I can even figure this out typically in the back end of Shopify, around about what's the shipping cost as a percentage of total sales? What's the returns cost? So the number of people that return product, what's that as a percentage of sales? And then ideally, like, can we get like a round number of about what we think the overhead would be? And if we don't have that from that company, then, just using our best judgment based on what we've seen for other companies around that size, we kind of put together a number of about where that might be. And that's what I would say is like, that's an analog. It's not going to be the P&L, but it's going to get me really close to understanding the profitability of what we're doing.
How does it change your behavior and how you optimize for ads? Because you're obviously looking at multiple channels, not just Meta, not just Google. How do you piece that together, especially when there are other channels that are involved that may be outside of your control?
Yep. So in a couple of examples of that, there's one company where we manage all of their digital, but we don't manage their TV and radio budgets, and their TV and radio budgets are several million a month. And so it's a substantial budget. There's another one where, we don't do their influencer management. We do influencer management. We don't do theirs. And that's, again, like another couple of $1 million a month for them. And so that has a pretty substantial impact to the overall business. And so there's two parts of what we're looking at with this, which is, you're right, we might not have influence over all of the other things that are going into the puzzle pieces, right? But we want to say, overall, when you level set everything, are you at least more profitable holistically based on what we're doing than what you aren't doing? And so there's two ways we're looking at this. One is going to be the aggregate look of profitability, which is that aspect of things where, MER is a good analog to get a rough idea for that. Media efficiency rate, total revenue divided by total ad spend. And so if we say, if we do loop in, the ad spend that you had on TV and radio, and we loop in, the influencers and all of that stuff, can we at least say that you're at least maintaining where you need to be? Even though we didn't influence those things, we at least can say, you're maintaining a 10-1 or a 4-1 or whatever that is, that's your sweet spot. Then we can look at this and say, you're likely still in a good spot as we continue to scale on what we're doing here as well with everything else. That's the aggregate level look that's really worthwhile. Now, for the ones that we are managing everything, it becomes very easy because we can get that now, just not from an MER perspective, we can get it down to the dollar amount and say, we were able to scale you $200,000 more in ad spend. You made $800,000 more in, let's say, top line revenue, and you made $300,000 more in profit after everything's said and done. And so, that was a really good thing, minus the ad spend and everything else. So that's really nice when you get there. The other aspect of this, though, is going to be on the unit level. So a big part that we're looking at for this would be, let's say that you have a product that costs $200. And let's say that on that $200 product, your cost of goods sold is higher. And so let's say that the actual amount that you're going to make profit off of that sale, it would be $50. Now, let's say you have a $100 product and the actual profit that you would make from that $100 product being sold is $75 because you have less margin or less COGS on that one. Let's say that we acquire customers and we spend $50 to acquire a customer for you. Well, that $50 for a $200 purchase is a 4-to-1 ROAS, right? And so if you were just looking in the back end of Google or Facebook or something, you might be more excited about that 4-to-1 instead of the 2-to-1 ROAS of the $100 purchase with a $50 to acquire that purchase. But in reality, from a profitability standpoint, that $100 item, you made $25 more profit. And so you had a lower ROAS, 2-to-1, let's say a lower MER from that as well, if you were going to include that. But the profitability, the bottom line is better. And so what we like to do is let's get at least the cost of goods sold for the items within your catalog so we can optimize the campaigns around which items are more profitable for you as well. And then we can actually send that data into Google, into Facebook, and we can allow their machine learning to also get more intelligent about sending getting sales of the more profitable products versus just the ones that have the higher top line return on ad spend.
What are you building, William, to help you make these decisions? Are these a bunch of Excel sheets that we don't see behind the scenes, like a super sophisticated system of an interlinked web of Google Sheets, or is there like a fancy AI tool that you're using?
A little bit of both. We start with some carrier pigeons that we just have fly out. No, I'm just kidding. But there are some tools that we've used. Some of our customers are using a tool actually called Profit Metrics, and it's a really great tool that you can use to help with this. Otherwise, there's like you said, Google Sheets. We can bring that in. Sometimes customers have this data already within their Shopify backend, and they have the COGS set up in there, which is really nice when they do that. Other times they're working with other types of like PIM software, something like that. They're using maybe like Channel Advisor or something where they have all of their cost of goods sold within there, or NetSuite. And so it really depends on kind of where customers' data is pulled in. But then, we pull that data in through either the Google Sheets or wherever we're getting that into Power BI. And then there's some software that we've written that allows us to take that and send it into the different places that we need to in the way that we need to.
From a visualization point of view, how often are you passing that on to your clients and say, hey, look, dashboard? Or are you keeping that to yourselves and your team and making those decisions and coming to your clients and say, all right, these are the decisions and this is why, and you don't need to know what the data, what the dashboard looks like, because that's going to confuse the heck out of you. Where are you at in that process?
That's a really interesting thing. So I like people having the ability to have access to as much of the data from that as possible. And so we do have massively just robust metric reports that they can look at within Power BI that our customers could see. So the data is available there for them. That said, I'd say we try to do like a dance where you figure out which customers like that information and which don't, right? And I'm sure that you see this a lot of times in like the email that you're doing. There's analysis paralysis. If you give a customer too much information, then they just won't make a decision. And the same thing happens within business too. If you just inundate people with too much information, then they can't actually figure out what steps to take to move forward, even though that you think that you've lined it out really nicely. So to your point, there are some customers where it's like, what are the 3 or 4 things that they need to know in order for them to say, yep, looks good, sounds good, let's move forward. And then you have other customers though, where it's a very different dance. And they want to have that information. And I'm thinking of a customer in Singapore where the reports that we were sending out to them on a daily basis or so were significantly more robust versus another customer that we have that, I think there's one customer, we maybe end up actually getting on a phone call with them once a quarter because they're of the mindset. They're like, I don't want to know anything about this. It looks good. It's making more money. Keep doing it. And they're like, I don't want to be involved in that. Right.
Fair enough. Yeah.
So I think it's just figuring out that dance.
That makes sense. I think I may have asked you this before, but how did you end up with a client all the way out in Singapore, and you're based in Minneapolis?
Yeah. Yep. Minnesota. That's a good question. I'm trying to remember actually where we ended up connecting with them at first. If I remember correctly, they ended up coming to us just through our website. That was several years ago. But they came to us through our website. And if I remember correctly, the reason why they had reached out to us in the first place was they saw some things I think that I had posted in the Shopify Plus channel on Facebook. So there's the Shopify Plus merchants channel. And there's some things that I had posted in there, right? And I like to try and post in there and help people out. Although I haven't posted in there as often as I used to, just gotten busy. But I think if I remember correctly, they said that they had seen some things that we were talking about along these lines of, profitability and optimizing around that. And the owner of this company reached out and said, that's exactly what we've been looking for. We've run down this path with other people who are, quite happy spending the money, but it turns out it's not profitably spent. And so, we need somebody that's focused on like what our goal is, which is profit. So
it makes a lot of sense. Like I said, common sense, but
yeah.
May not be the most common. What are the you're fairly active on social, and you're fairly active on the on conferences and speaking at events. What are some of the most commonly held viewpoints that you hear about or see or read that you disagree with in the space?
No, that's a good one. Because I feel like there's a lot of things that I run into where people say one thing, and I think that they've done it just because let's just say they've tested it and they found success with it. And so they assume that that must be true for a lot of other things without understanding the basics of how, let's say, algorithms can work or can't work. And one of the things that I think that I've seen before with this is the idea of, let's say running, hundreds of net new creative through an account all at once. I like I like accelerated creative testing. I like the idea of being able to test out lots of different creative. I think that's a great thing to do. But you have to look at that based on your budget itself. How much is your cost of or your customer acquisition cost, so you can figure out whether or not you've spent enough to even know whether or not there's anything to this creative or not. And so what we found, though, is that sometimes people will put so much through this just to see what's happening. And there's like a penny spent here or a penny spent there. And so it's like, well, that wasn't a really good effective test. And so one of the things that I really like is, and you look at all the creatives and you'll see these, let's say that they're 98% the exact same ad with just a couple of tweaks here and there and here and there. That's fine. But I don't think that that's going to usually be the thing that's going to radically find that big win that you're looking for. And so what I like to talk about is thoughtful creative testing. And so I still think it's fine to test out lots of new creatives, but let's say 20 really interesting net new creatives instead of 100 creatives that are just tiny little variations of one creative, if that makes sense. So that's one that I struggle with.
So let's unpack that a little bit.
Sure.
I get that from the point of view of if you have a really tiny budget or relative to the volume of creatives that you're trying to test, say you're spending $100 a day, and that's split across 20 creatives, and your cost per acquisition on average is, say, really, really high, like $40. That's going to take you 8 days on average to acquire a single customer from a single ad, which makes absolutely no sense when you're thinking about high frequency testing. So I suppose the cure to that would be either to up your spend and be a little bit more aggressive on the testing phase, or maybe just test a few creatives at once and gain a lot more insights that way. Now, I want to pick your mind on this. How do decide, and what's your process on testing? And when it comes to creatives, the nature of it is a little bit different from, testing an email creative, because we can attribute exactly what happens in an email to specific actions that occur based on the clicks that have happened and where those clicks occur. But what's going on with ad creatives?
There's a number of different ways we like to test ad creatives within accounts. And like I said, a lot of this comes down to just like an internal algorithm that we have built out for where a customer is at within their journey. And so let's say that a particular customer is at a 4-to-1 return, and that's break even for them, right? Like they're right there. You can't dedicate as much towards testing as you would like to. And so because you just actually have to make sure that it's performant. And one of the things that people have to forget is, or that a lot of people forget when it comes to testing on an ad budget, is you're guaranteeing that one or the other is less performant. So let's say that you're saying, let's say that you need to be at a 4-to-1 and you start spending money on a test. You're guaranteeing that either the current performance or the test is less performant than what you need it to be, if that makes sense, right? So one of them is going to be less performant than the other. And so if it happens to be that you earmark 10% for a test, fine. If you earmark 25% for a test and it's less performant than the other one, then you have wasted 25% of your ad budget. That's a pretty significant chunk, right? And so that's why I say if somebody is borderline where they need to be, we can't earmark as much for testing in order to be as aggressive in what you're testing out. So you might have to say maybe you don't test out as many net new creatives because you're testing it out on a smaller amount of budget. I like to test out creatives ideally in the context that I want to see if they perform. And so if I'm trying to acquire the purchase, ideally I want to test them out within the context that I want, where I want to optimize that for purchase. And the biggest reason for that is because you could have a test of a particular creative that just crushes it from a click-based perspective, right? But when you actually look at the performance on whether or not it's driving the bottom of funnel result that you want, the actual purchase, it's not keeping up with that. And so if you test it with the wrong goal, you're not going to get that. Now, where I will change on that is if your budget is so low and your CAC is, like you said, $40, and you're like, look, you're going to get one purchase every 8 days or something ridiculous, or one purchase every other day. Facebook's never going to have the ability to really effectively optimize that, and so you're not really giving it the best shot. And so it may be in those situations worthwhile to say, well, what's that goal that you can go above that? How about optimizing for add to cart, optimizing for click, optimizing even for reach, just to see if you can get something to spend on that ad and see what happens. So there are ways to where you can increment based on that, based on where you're at for budget. So a lot of that would depend on if you're a smaller customer, maybe you don't have as much budget. We may need to go a little bit higher up on that. But ultimately, the goal that I'm trying to look at is if we can get thoughtful with those creatives, then we can test something a little bit more purposeful, and you're usually going to find some better wins there that are more significant. And what I mean by this is, if you test out just all of those different tiny little variations, what you oftentimes will see is maybe there's like this tiny little bump in performance. We see this all the time where it's like, oh, this one outperformed by 5%. This week, but if you kept running it, it doesn't perform by 5% more the next week. And then maybe it is, and so it goes back and forth. And so you haven't actually found or learned anything. You maybe even take away this learning from this and that copy, thinking that copy was better when really it wasn't any better. It just happened to be that it was new, and so there was less fatigue on it. But as soon as it ran for a week, now it's got some fatigue behind that ad, and it's no different than the other ones, and it's actually maybe a little bit less performant. And so versus a thoughtful one, ideally you're looking for a movement that's a little bit more significant. So when I'm testing creative, I'm not always looking for just like those tiny little incremental wins, although those are important. I'm looking for something that's going to change it in a substantial way. An example of this, there was a customer we had, their cost to acquire a customer, I think, was about $12. And then when we were able to add in this new creative for them, same audience, same campaign, everything's identical, just adding this ad into that campaign. The new cost to acquire customer with that ad was $1.43. That's a massive difference. And so those are the kinds of movements that I like to see from thoughtful creative testing. So you can do both, but I think that a lot of times we find false wins or false losses when we do like this hyper accelerated testing with minimal budget. And I think that we end up making a lot of just wrong inferences based on incomplete data.
Right. At what point do you make a decision? Or do you use a tool like a significance calculator to make that choice?
Yeah. And again, it's going to depend on the size of the client. So if you're a small client, I probably can't run it to statistical significance. If you do, like, you're just never going to be able to test anything out, right? You're testing one new ad out for every 3 months or something, and that's not worthwhile either. And so there is a gut assumption that goes into this as well, where you say, okay, do we have enough data to feel good about moving this? Now let's go ahead and move that into a more permanent position within the campaigns, assuming that we've nailed this and saying that it's good. And if something changes now that it's in like the permanent position within the actual main campaigns, then now maybe we need to turn that on or off based on that. But yes, for bigger customers, if we have the ability to run some tests a little bit longer to statistical significance, I like to run that. I also like to run some tests a little bit longer, even beyond that. Not just seeing like which one's better at acquiring the customer right now, here and then, but which one's better at acquiring the right customer over the next 3 to 6 to 12 months, right? And so this came from a really good SaaS background in understanding of these things. But let's just say that you and I were running a test on an ad campaign, and we find out that people in Minnesota, this is a dumb idea, but this would never happen. People in Minnesota spend 5 times more than people in California or something, right? It's just like massive difference. Right. Well, because you could solve that with targeting, but let's just say that you can't solve it with targeting. You say, okay, great. I'm going to go out. I'm just going to acquire these customers. And I find an ad that's just crushing it in terms of getting me a whole bunch of customers from California for, let's say, 50% less than I'm getting them from Minnesota. The problem is, it's not just a 2x difference in terms of the LTV from Minnesota. It's a 5x difference. And so that one ad might be resonating more to get a lower cost of customer acquisition cost, but it's not getting me the customer that I really want. Whereas maybe the other ad, maybe I'm getting a little bit higher customer acquisition cost out of that ad, but it's getting me, significantly more customers from Minnesota, which have a 5 times LTV. That's the kind of things that I like to look at sometimes with these creative tests as well. Not just which one's acquiring you the most immediate purchase, but which one's acquiring the right purchases.
Talking about LTV, I've recently had a really interesting conversation with a friend/client of mine, and he's done really well. He's pretty underground, not really appearing all that much, but he makes a couple $1 million in revenue a month. And throughout his journey, he's gone through like multiple phases, and he is of the belief that you have to break even on the first purchase on a blended average type of a perspective. Not you may not be breaking even from just Facebook, but in totality, that first acquisition of a customer should allow you to break even on all of your spend, all of your ad spend. And that is a contrarian view to how the bigger e-commerce companies, especially the ones that are public and extremely fast growing, the poster boys of e-commerce, like Warby Parker, think about break even, LTV, and returns. They think about returns from the perspective of how much am I getting per customer in lifetime value over a certain period of time. And I'm taking that in comparison to my ad cost, and I'm seeing a return on lifetime. But the challenge of that is, and this is something that my friend brought up, the challenge of that is that you're not going to know when LTV comes to fruition. You're not going to know if market conditions and your assumptions are going to remain the same 6 months, 12 months down the road. And so what your initial assumption of what LTV would be in 12 months may be extended to 24 months. And for those reasons, you're going to have to need an incredible amount of cash float to keep doing what you're doing, to keep acquiring customers. And it's extremely unsustainable. And that's what a lot of DTC companies in the public space are facing at the moment.
Yep. So I agree with your friend in a lot of contexts. One, we've seen a lot of D2C brands that got too crazy on this. And I'd say they almost went with like the San Francisco approach, right? Where it was like, let's just pump all the money into this. And we're not worried about this. And it could be a 24-month payback period, right? And you're just like, I mean, it's just massive. And there's a lot of truth to this. And so the one thing that I would say I don't want to write off here is, if you have that VC money, if you have the ability to float that, it's still not be bad. You've gained a significant market share over your competitors to where, yeah, I'd say most of us are willing to say that we are in a recession, whether we call it that or not. And I think that it's actually going to get a little bit worse yet in 2023 for most of us. But if you have the cash to ride through that, and you happen to have that customer base now, you can come out of the other side of this in a really good position. And so that might not necessarily be the worst thing in the world. Where I look at this, though, one thing that I like about what your friend said is looking at not just, are you breaking even on Facebook, but are you breaking even across all those channels? And that's where we really like to look at like the MER. It's like this, level set kind of thing, where a lot of times, well, sure, Facebook took credit for it. Google took credit for that sale. Email took credit for the sale, right? They all took credit for the sale, but it was just one sale. And so when you get this level set, that is the really nice thing about something like MER or something like that. And so I agree with him in the idea. It's like you should be looking at like these holistic approaches. But the one thing to your friend's benefit is, during a potential for a bear market or any type of market swing that's going to have it, yes, you are more at risk for that. But the difference there is you're also putting yourself at risk by allowing your competitor to gobble up your market share as well. There's pros and cons to both. The one thing that I would say in favor of still going a little bit aggressive, though, is finding that sweet spot where you're not putting the business on the line. And so we don't like to use LTV as much as we'll sometimes use maybe a 3-month LTV, a 4-month LTV, a 6-month LTV. What is that number that you feel comfortable with, to where you say, what is that amount of time that you're willing to wait to break even on a customer now? And if you say, I'm willing to go to 6 months, well, then maybe optimize for 3 months, because then you have that buffer in there that says, like, I don't have to break even on, purchase 1. I need to break even by purchase 6. If I plan to break even by purchase 3 or by month 3, then I'm at least giving myself the aggression that I need to be, making sure that I'm going out capturing the market. But I've also got this buffer for when things don't work the way that I'm hoping that they do.
That's smart. William, let's take a quick segue. I know that you're a man of many passions, and we spoke about this a little bit. Yep. And you have for people watching this on YouTube, you have an amazing condenser mic. You look great, and you have this nice background that if you look at the left-hand side of my room over here, there's a little bit of a backdrop. The reason for that is I've gotten so many comments on how white I look on camera because of how terrible my lighting conditions are. But anyways, that's a quick side note. I'm learning as well. How do you think about your life and I know that you're a musician. How do you split your life between your passions and your work? And you're clearly very passionate about D2C and what you do at work as well. How do you split your time? And what is there a cross-pollination of learnings that's happening?
Yeah, that's good. I'm not going to let you off the hook on real quick the lighting stuff, though, because you were saying about your lighting or whatever.
Please tell me.
No. You like I think that you're doing a great job too. You at least have some extra lights in there to bring into your shot, which I think is a really good thing. The number of times that you get on video calls with people, and it's like they've got like a window behind them, and they're completely just a silhouette or whatever, and you're like, I actually can't see your face at all right now. I don't know if you're there. Are your eyes closed? So, but as far as splitting my time and everything, it's hard. And I think anybody who's an entrepreneur will say the exact same thing, that if you want to be at the top of any field, you almost have to be deficient in other areas. And so I think about somebody who is in, let's say, an Olympic sport, right? If they're going to be the absolute best runner, they likely are deficient at something else. I don't know what that is, but there's something else that they're significantly deficient in. because there has to be almost like this balance or this compensation. Even if you think about, the bell curve, it's one of my favorite illustrations for everything, but it's like, well, if you're perfectly balanced, then you're just right in the middle of the bell curve. But if you're extremely to one side of that bell curve, then there is an imbalance on the other side of that. And so if you're extremely gifted in one area, you're usually lacking in something else. And so I'd say that, what's likely true is give yourself grace. As a CEO, it's something that I've had to learn myself, which is there are a lot of other things that I would like to do or that I am also passionate about that I maybe don't pursue as much now because of there's the very real responsibility of what I am doing here. And so just reminding myself that it's like, what though, but what I'm doing is a net benefit for a lot of people. And so there's the benefit of my own team, my own employees, our customers, their customers' families, right? Like that, their employees' families. I mean, this extends so far into like the overall health of what you're trying to do. So I think giving myself grace and giving others grace, but then it's also, I'd say, figuring out how you can merge those passions, like you were saying, into what you're doing. And so one of my passions is math and statistics and just number theory itself. And so I like to study some of that stuff on my own, just to enjoy. There's a lot of things even within, string theory that I really appreciate and enjoy and read up on. Well, you would think, well, what does string theory have to do with advertising? Well, a lot more than you would think. And without going into, the nitty gritties of that and losing people on this call, the idea here is, in fact, there's a couple of articles I've written on our blog. One's about Simpson's paradox. And how that relates to advertising. And I don't know that I've seen anybody else write about that before. And it's a really interesting statistical analysis thing. Another one about Bayes' theorem and how we've applied that. And so even music and I brought up sports. It's like, well, basketball, that was a passion of mine. I don't play basketball as much as I used to, but I've got kids now and they're getting into basketball. And so as I'm back in the court there and, watching them and so it's like, okay, well, what are the different illustrations and things that I can use that to apply to what I'm doing? And I think that's the way that you continue to bring that back in, is that you might not necessarily have those same things that you were doing before. But how do you take those passions that you have in other areas and apply them to what you're currently doing? And I think that allows you to have a toe in both worlds, if that makes sense.
William, what are you deficient in right now? And are you intentional with it?
Oh, that's a good question. To be fair, it goes in let's say, seasonalities, depending on what's going on within the business. And right now we're in an interesting spot where we've actually told a couple of customers that they need to readjust their yearly projections based on what we're seeing in the market and what we think is going to be realistic for them. So that means that they're pulling back on ad spend, which means that I'm spending more time doing a few other things than I maybe would have liked to have done in terms of just like looking at their businesses, our businesses, more time spent on some different tasks. So the thing that I'm probably the most efficient at right now, as of the last couple of months here, is my workouts. I'm not working out as much as I would like to, as much as I used to, and so something I got to get back into it. There was a really good, I don't remember who it was that said this, but somebody that I remember seeing on TikTok, no less, talking about how it's like all of your other goals depend on whether or not like you're alive, like and healthy enough to do the work, right? And so it's like I can't meet any of these other goals if I'm in a hospital bed, right, or whatever. Yeah. So that's a good one. The other thing that I'd say that I am, admittedly go through deficiencies in sometimes would be some of those hobbies, right, where it's like, okay, I don't have as much time to do this during that period of time, but I need to do this within the business. But then there are other times where you say, okay, great, now I'm able to do these hobbies, and maybe I'm a little bit deficient on date nights with my wife, and then I go, okay, wait a minute, nope, I got to refocus and reprioritize. Nope, date night, we're going to do that, and I might be deficient on hobbies. Okay, but now I'm doing that, and I'm not helping my kids with their homework, and so it's like, okay, wait a minute, come back, refocus. And the way that I like to approach it is, and this is where I'd say that you're always going to be deficient in some area of this, and just trying to figure out how you do the best you can. But there's a really good concept about, I think I first heard about this through EOS, if you're familiar with EOS traction.
Yeah.
But it's, the rocks. And so the illustration that they use is, if you put the sand in and then the pebbles and then the rocks, like there's not enough room in the vase for the rocks to fit in. But if you put the rocks in and then the pebbles and then the sand and then the water, it's like it all fits in, and it's the same amount of stuff. And so trying to at least say to myself, what are the things, and I've done this a number of times where I write it down, and what are the things that are the most important to me in life right now? What are my rocks, right? And there's like, you do this for business, but then also do this for personal life and say, okay, how do I schedule those things first and foremost? So it's like, look, even if everything's burning around you, it's like, these are the things that you got to do, right? And then you can say, okay, great, now fit the pebbles in and fit those other things in. And so as long as I try to do that, then I'd say that I'm usually good within the rocks. But the rock, remember, might not be where I'm not working out 5 days a week anymore. Maybe I'm only working out 3 days a week. I'm still working out, right? And I think it's that same kind of concept where you say, okay, what is the minimum number of engagement that I need to make sure that this still maintains it being a rock in my life? But there are other things that do need to be also dealt with. Yeah.
I fully appreciate that. And my first mentor told me that exact same idea around, and he used the analogy of a cooking stove with like maybe 4 or 5 flames that you can have, like 4 or 5 burners, right? And it's kind of like life. You can have maybe one on full blast, the second one on like medium heat, and the rest are going to be on low flame or completely switched off. And you have to be conscious about what flames you burn and what burners you switch off, because then you know what you're getting yourself into, and you're prepared for the consequences of doing so.
I like that.
And seasonalities, it's also a matter of seasons, and we go through kind of like ebbs and flows in our lives, and some seasons we're just a lot more focused on work. And I over the past weekend, last week I was super stressed out, and from everything that was going on in mostly in work. And when it came to the weekend, I was struggling to find a way to fully unwind and just relax. And that's when I realized that one of my deficiencies is that I just don't put enough. I have zero allocation to my interests and hobbies outside of work, very minimal, to the point where if someone came to me and said, what do you do for fun? And what do you do to relax? I would go like, I don't know. I genuinely don't know. At this point in time, I don't know. So, that's just, I guess, part of the journey.
Yeah. And that's very real of you to admit that too. Right. And I think that's why I try to admit that here as well. I feel like entrepreneurs need to hear that you're not the only one struggling with that. I went and did a yoga class actually just last week. And the guy that was running the yoga class, he owns the yoga studio and everything. And he owns actually several restaurants, right? Like he's doing really well. But he was like, what are you here for? I was like, man, I'm just here to kind of loosen up a little bit of stress that I've got going on here, right? Like there's a lot of things going on. And he said, tell me about it. He's like, I teach this crap. I was like, I had to laugh at it, like, because he's talking about, yoga and just that idea of it. He's like, I mean, I teach this, but I'm also, he said, he said the exact same thing. He's like, I feel like I don't do anything for me anymore. Right. And he was like, and I'm unbalanced as well. And I was like, it's very common. It's very easy. But again, remembering that idea of like cycles and everything. And so I like that, I think my hand's going up and to the right for you right now. It's up and to the left for me, but for at least the viewers and stuff. So it is that idea. And we see this within, let's just say, campaign performance. We see this in life as well, but it's like, you have ups and then downs and then ups and then downs and ups and downs and ups and downs. And if you just see them in like a small window of time, all you see is that it went up and down, maybe up and down, up and down. You don't see the overall progress of where it goes. And sometimes I have to remind myself, and I pull back and even just look at my business over the last, instead of even like quarters, like look over the last several years. And it's like, oh, wow, we're in a wildly different spot than we were there. And it's like, yeah, this quarter might be a bad quarter, or this, whatever might be, whatever, this week or whatever. But look at the big picture. And this is true for our personal lives too. And you might say, it's like, oh, sure, you might be having a quarter. You might even have a bad year in terms of like hobbies and what makes Josh, right? But then it's like, but look at your life overall as a whole. And it's like, okay, but over the course of a decade, is Josh still progressing towards the things that he believes are what makes him, within his core? And it's like, I think oftentimes that can be true. And if it's not, then that's where you say, okay, well, I got to schedule that in there. And it might still be on a minimal scale, right? It might still be, it's like, hey, I'm just going to work out 2 days a week. It might be, I'm going to work out 1 day a week, whatever that is. It's like, but this is a rock. So I want to start doing it at least this much now. And I can always get better at it.
I love that. Have grace, especially for yourselves. And that's a great place to end the conversation. William, thank you so much for being on the show. And for people listening, interested in learning more about what you do and wanting to connect, where should they go to?
Yeah, thanks, Josh. Great to have you here.
Where should they go to if they want to connect and learn more about what you do? Would it be LinkedIn?
Yeah, LinkedIn's fine. Best place is actually just go to Elumynt, spelled ELUMYNT.com. Otherwise, I'm on Twitter too, which is just at WMHARRIS101. LinkedIn, they can find me as well. There's a billion William Harrises though, so it's probably easier to go to either Twitter or the website.
Awesome. William, thank you for being on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to the E-commerce Profits Podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get notified of future episodes.